Okay. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Carteret Analytics' latest update, I suppose, on our most recent research paper to coincide with, of course, Lewis Hamilton's incredible achievement of reaching his 7th world title. We decided to put together a research paper to objectively find out who the greatest Formula One driver is of all time. Of course, it's a very interesting debate at the moment that a lot of people are having off the back of what Hamilton's managed to achieve. And we found some really interesting insights in that. Probably more surprisingly that, or possibly not as surprisingly to some people, that Hamilton isn't quite the best yet. So we're going to go into more detail about that now. I'm joined by Carteret Analytics Director Matthew Belford and Corporate Analyst Joe Lawlor.
Hello.
Shall we crack off with the overview table and just have a quick discussion on where people are ranked and what we think of that? Of course, Fangio's come out on top, and he's appeared to be a truly dominant figure in the sport across all objective metrics that we looked into. Possibly surprising that Hamilton fails at this point to actually surpass him in any capacity, but of course we know that he may well not be finished yet.
It's up for debate or discussion as to whether he's going to continue. I think it's highly anticipated that he will. I think he's still got everything going for him, and I think if he stays with the same team, then there's no reason why he can't go on to win 8, 9, 10 world titles. Certainly at his current trajectory and the way that the way the team's been put together at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And do we think, obviously, the big one that stands out for Hamilton out of our analysis is his agility. He's possibly struggled a little bit more than a lot of the guys up here to adapt properly, and possibly hasn't been challenged whilst having to maybe move constructors or enter into races with a new engine. Do we think that's something that's possibly missing from his performances?
I think when you're comparing it to Fangio won 4 world titles with 4 different constructors using 4 different engines. Hamilton's not quite reached that level of adaptability yet. So in terms of agility, it is Fangio that stands alone from all the other drivers, really, in terms of his achievements, which are pretty phenomenal, to be fair.
Are we surprised to see Schumacher in third? I think it's fair to say at this point, with Hamilton reaching the same milestone as him, that I think the data aligns quite well with what a lot of people are thinking in terms of he's certainly at least on par and probably is above Schumacher now in the greatest of all time.
Yeah, I would say it's a fair assessment. He's now surpassed Schumacher's record of race wins, and I think our objective analysis proves that he is objectively better than Schumacher. Definitely, I think it's a fair assessment.
I think going back to the agility, it is interesting that although Hamilton doesn't necessarily excel in that performance attribute, he's actually what looks like the 18th out of the top 20 in that particular attribute, whereas Schumacher's double that. It kind of goes to show that maybe agility is not the key, or certainly not one of the key attributes that determines whether you're a top racer or not.
Alonso is an interesting one on the objective table. I think outside of the top 3, I think Alonso, he's ranked 10th on the table. I think our analysis shows that he has dominated in the sport. He's 2-time world champion, and he has shown that he can compete in terms of the other drivers on the table. But we think that the analysis shows that really the length of his career and sort of the extended period of his career in what would deem to be less competitive cars is probably having a bigger impact on his ratings than maybe if this analysis would have been done 3-4 years ago. I think it would have shown him higher up the table. But I think that longevity in his career is certainly having an impact on his ratings. And the same would go for Hamilton, really. if he continued his career maybe at a different team and he wasn't as successful, our analysis would show that he would start to fall down the rankings. It would have a direct impact on his Carteret rating.
Certainly an important time for him, isn't it, in terms of objectively calculating whether he's at a critical stage in terms of he has the opportunity to surpass Fangio now, or he could stay put, or in fact he could start to drop. As we know with most sports, age does kick in at some point, and your objective performances do start to decrease, and that will reflect in his ability to maintain near the top or possibly at the top of this table come the end of next season.
I think if he continues at his current trajectory, I think he would surpass Fangio during the next season, during the 2021 season. I think that's what our analysis shows me.
Yeah.
There's always the flip side to that coin. If he doesn't maintain his trajectory that he's on right now, he's only 20 Carteret ratings clear of Michael Schumacher, and his rating is now locked in since he's obviously retired. So if Hamilton's performance for some reason isn't maintained the next season, then perhaps he could move down to third place.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, well, shall we move on to, let's dive further down into the attributes for each of these top three guys that we've been discussing, Hamilton, Fangio, and Schumacher. Obviously, in our report, we had a closer look in terms of their individual performance attributes and what makes up that driver's high performance levels. It's interesting to see that when we look at the performance attributes broken down, we can see that Schumacher and Fangio hold fairly similar attributes, whereas Hamilton's actually been able to he's really been supported by that ability to maintain dominance during his time. What do we think in terms of the makeup of these guys, and are we seeing a pattern in what each driver needs in terms of their individual attributes in order to reach that top level?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they're all very similar certainly at the top end of the table. They are very similar in their attributes. I think for Fangio and certainly Hamilton, I think it's their dominance which really stands them apart from the others. I think one of the difficulties we had was assessing drivers from different eras and different career lengths, and I think the algorithm takes that into account really well. But yeah, I think it shows that it's that level of dominance that these guys have over the others that really sets them apart.
It seems like speed is also a significant performance attribute when it comes to excelling in the F1 industry. That Fangio is the second highest speed success adjusted out of the top 20, and then that actually drops quite dramatically down to 32 for Lewis Hamilton, and perhaps that's one of the key things that sort of sets them apart.
Fangio was second behind Ascari, wasn't he? I think Ascari, in terms of speed, success adjusted speed, I think Ascari was the standout driver there. And again, I think he would have gone on, if circumstances had been different, he would have gone on to dominate the sport for a lot longer than he did during his short career.
It's an interesting split, and it possibly shows that Formula One itself's adapted slightly, and that it's become more of a tactical, strategical sport, in that when you look at the likes of Schumacher and Hamilton wedged in between Ascari and Fangio, both showing the highest speed adjusted attribute levels, they both have, again, there's some of the highest, but there's a significant gap there, and it possibly tells you that when it comes to speed and being able to dominate and win, it's possibly not always the most important thing. It's not always important that you're the fastest on the track at all times. It's playing that long game and strategically calculating where you need to finish on the grid in order to maintain that dominance level throughout the course of the Grand Prix.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Jack. I think it was important for us to build a number of different metrics into the algorithm to take these things into account. I think one driver that stands out in terms of speed is Stirling Moss. I think on our table he was rated 11th. I think he was the only one in the top 20 that hadn't won a world title. Partly because his rival at the time was Fangio, and I think Fangio's dominance really it had a massive impact on Stirling Moss. Given if he was racing in a different era, then I've no doubt that he would have been world champion. I think if he'd have achieved one world title, then I think that would have put him in our top 10. And I think if he'd have achieved 2 world titles, then I think that would have put him in our top 5 on our table. So, and again, you can see his speed is somewhere aligned to Schumacher's. So, he was certainly one of the quickest drivers on the grid.
There's a lot of cases on this table, I think, of what could have been with some of these drivers if they had not unfortunately passed. The likes of Ascari, particularly Senna, I noticed that our objective analysis, we had a strong indication from that his performance trajectory, it would have been much higher if he had been able to sustain his performances over another 4 seasons, possibly picking up another 1 or 2 world titles, and that really could have put him in contention for top place. It is unfortunate.
I think it's intriguing that should Stirling Moss have won an extra 1 world title, that he would have moved up into the top 10, where he's currently placed 11th. But if he won 2 world titles, he would have made it all the way into 5th. So that just goes to demonstrate what an impact winning world titles has, and how it shows the prestige as a driver.
Yeah, and I think it's credit to Fangio as well. This is the exact reason why he's come out on top of our objective analysis. He was, Moss was competing in the same era as him, and you could argue that, Fangio being there, as Matthew said earlier, it's possibly restricted his ability to really move up the table and achieve more than he had time to do. So it's full credit to Fangio, and it supports what our data says in terms of he was a very dominant figure during his time.
I think it would be interesting to see over the next few years, or over the next sort of decade, if there's any younger drivers currently on the grid driving for the lesser teams that are going to sort of rise to the top, and give these guys a run for the money, really, and see if they, and I'm sure there's a lot of talent on the grid. It's just getting the right driver in the right car at the right time, isn't it? And I think it's exciting times, really. And it'll also be interesting to assess Hamilton again in 12 months' time to see how his rating has improved or declined, and see whether he has actually achieved the number 1 spot of the greatest racing driver of all time.
Hamilton's coming towards the end of his career now. We've obviously got Vettel, who's still racing as well at present. That he's on this table as a very, very strong driver, and it will be interesting to see what happens in the future. What's interesting is looking at what attributes are required to achieve the highest Carteret ratings possible, and you could argue dominance is an essential one there. And Hamilton's retirement from the sport might open up that opportunity for one of these younger drivers to come in and sustain a period of dominance, and they could quite dramatically climb the rankings table, and join the likes of Hamilton in all times.
No, I think it's very interesting that only 2 of the top 20 are current present drivers, and maybe that indicates that despite all the high technological gear that they have and the more intense training that the drivers now have, maybe arguably more sophisticated, that it doesn't necessarily show that it makes a better driver, and not at this moment in time anyway.
Yeah, it was one of the challenges that from when we set out was to ensure that the way that we measured these drivers' performances was able to take into consideration the natural evolution of the sport in terms of the capability of the cars compared to when the likes of Fangio and Ascari were driving is obviously dramatically improved. But the way that the Carteret rating's been able to be formulated has allowed us to actually see that if Fangio was in a modern day car in his prime, he would have been as much of an unstoppable force as he was back in his day, in current day. And I think that was a very important thing for us to be able to achieve. And we've absolutely done that based off the results.
Yeah, it's certainly insightful, the analysis that Carteret Analytics has been able to break down to show that despite the large disparities in the technological and contextual variables, we've been able to display objectively the top 20 F1 drivers of all time.
Absolutely. Hopefully we can continue to add to this list. Obviously our analysis will continue throughout the duration of future Grand Prix, and hopefully we see some adjustments to this table, and it'll be interesting to revisit in a year's time to see whether Hamilton has reached the levels that we've projected.
Yeah,
certainly.
Agreed.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much, guys, for your time, and thank you for listening.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
Jack. Thank you.